On July 25, 1998, a user going by the name Nascent wrote a post on alt.tv.xfiles/creative called A Caution About Public Criticism. Says Nascent, I too have found many aspects of some fanfic amusing, cliché, melodramatic, irritating, or downright dumb. And I'm guilty of discussing it with folks in private email, real life, and on at least one smaller list. But I question the wisdom of doing so in public, or even touting in public how much one does it in private. My handle Nascent means roughly not fully synthesized. I picked it because when I first sent my piece to ATX Creative, I was afraid that I would get all kinds of critical, unconstructive email. I imagined all authors did. At that time, I hadn't discovered the wonderful world of mailing lists and had learned about internet X-file culture from ATX, hardly a model for constructive conversation. I decided if the first story got people yelling at me for being too shippy or sloppy or out of character, if I ever wrote again, it would be under a more fully formed name. Now, of course, I know how rude that would have been, but I was a scared little newbie. Give me a break. However, if I had entered into fanfic and seen discussions like we've been seeing for the past couple of days, I wouldn't have written at all. Ever. I would have taken a quick look around and left. I've been around long enough to know which kinds of stories folk are talking about, but for someone without a good idea of the breadth and depth of fanfic, these criticisms appear a lot more scathing than to those of us who've been around. I'm afraid that by making this place seem more unfriendly than it actually is, we're going to lose new, potentially wonderful voices. I'm willing to shrug and hit delete on 100 flick fics just to find one superb one, but I'm afraid that superb one will never get posted if we scare folks away. Finally, and I don't know exactly how to say this gently, though I want to preface it by saying that I have a lot of respect for many folks who've participated, and I hope they'll take it constructively, but when one makes fun of others, it usually only makes them look like they're trying unsuccessfully to make themselves look better. Again, I'm as guilty as the next person, but I would gently suggest that it be done in private, where among friends, the context is much clearer. The original post was very well received, to say the least. Nascent's appeal to kindness and understanding resonated with other fanfic authors who shared their own experiences of how it was when they were just starting out, and expressing worry over newbie authors being scared off by scathing critique. Alexia writes, if there is one thing I've learned from not only writing fanfiction, but writing in general and any other art form, is there is always going to be a certain number of people who don't like your work, just as there will always be a certain number who do. Some people will react positively to it, and others will do the exact opposite. Being a writer or artist of any kind, you have to be prepared for this. I personally believe that constructive criticism is much more effective than simply making humor out of or cutting down other people's honest efforts. Not everyone is a literary genius. I have never met anyone who was born with the gift of scribe. It is something that a person learns over time and by making mistakes. Aspiring writers should not be condemned for trying. They should rather be encouraged and supported and allowed to mature at their own rate. After all, I think we can all look back and remember a time when we too were just starting out. Other users argued that it wasn't so much the mean-spirited criticism that was killing the creativity and discouraging new authors, but the lack of any feedback at all. Bubu Kato, sorry if I pronounced that nickname wrong, wrote, "It obviously is. Then again, we can have a 53-post thread that rakes people who have the courage to post something of themselves here, but we can't find the energy to compliment someone on something they've written. This is so messed up." To which Megan responded by saying, "This too is what has bothered me more and more around here. There are 200 posts on a single topic, which is not a fiction. There are 3 stories, and none of those people probably get any feedback at all. I enjoy the intelligent, and I didn't see anyone being trashed, IMO, discussion, but it bothers me that people seem to read or lurk on this group only to jump into these threads, not to read and not to write. Being an old-timer since 95, this place wasn't like this when I got here. There were about the same amount of stories, almost no threads like this one or the other, and lots of comments. I wish I knew what happened to those people. I think the commenters are the ones who have been scared away, not the new writers. Yet another factor that some fans said was discouraging fanfic authors was that some pairings got more attention than others. D. Moore wrote, "So quite frankly, I don't think mean critical threads are the main problem here. It's the apathy of the group and the total lack of respect for anything that isn't MSR." To which Heidi responded, "Right here I think you have nailed it. I have noticed that this is a very MSR-oriented place right now. Not that this is a bad thing necessarily, it just seems to be true." A user named Amy wrote, "For my part, while I certainly understand the dampening effect that criticism can have on the beginner, I actually think the advice-style posts we've seen here lately are far preferable to private critiques, and here's why. First of all, while this is not invariably true, the vast majority of what I've seen has been polite, even written with humor. It doesn't strike me as the kind of thing that's going to strike terror into the heart of the would-be poster. I could be wrong. Different things affect different people. But it seems to me that enthusiasm for fic springs eternal." Welcome to another episode of Fandom X Archive. I am your host, Dinara Tangri, aka Alien Super Soldier. As you have already guessed, this episode we're going to talk about fanfiction, more specifically, X-Files fanfiction. Now, I admit I had a lot of problems with this episode. I was wrecking my brain trying to figure out my in with the script. Are we doing a deep dive into all.tv.xfiles creative? Are we doing a history lesson about the history of fanfiction? Just to give you a taste of my anxiety over this episode, I read an entire book about fanfiction. Well, the first third of a book. And while Fic by Anne Jameson does provide us with some interesting historical perspective, for instance, did you know that it was our fandom that created fanfiction.net? If this doesn't make you swell with fandom pride, you need to do another rewatch of the X-Files. Still, her account is very surface level and not enough to form a foundation for an entire podcast episode. Another reason why I have been procrastinating with the script for so long is fear. No, not fear of failure, although, but fear of controversy. As any fan and fanfic reader, I have opinions, strong opinions, about the current state of the X-Files fanfiction, about how fanfiction should be written, and how it used to be better before, etc., etc. I mean, if you know me from Twitter, then you know that I am prone to long and passionate rants about this very subject. But this podcast exists not as a tool for expressing my personal woes, but as a means to explore our history and to test my hypotheses about how it used to be. And when I started doing the research for this episode, I found, to my lack of surprise, that not much has changed since the 1990s, when the first X-Files fanfic were being brought to life. We don't need to read through hundreds of pages of Usenet group archives to see that fans have always been arguing about quality of fanfiction, about ships, about whether fanfic should be faithful to the source material and stick to the paranormal stuff, or ditch the structure of the show in favor of some juicy, spicy, shippy shenanigans. This has been a sober experience indeed, because reading all those comments and essays from the 1990s and early 2000s just showed that I was doing the same thing that the OG fans before me were doing decades earlier, arguing and creating discourse. And then something unexpected happened. My goddamn Twitter account got suspended. Now, it seems like I got it back, but for a few stressful hours when I thought it was gone forever, I managed to do some soul searching, and I realized that I didn't want to make an episode in which I rant about how those damn shippers are ruining fanfiction and that young authors can't write Scully to save their lives. Social media encourages reactionary content. We all know that. And while this kind of content is fine for a Twitter rant, when writing something more creative, say a podcast script, I don't want to just react. And this realization helped relieve some of the fear and anxiety, and I was able to write the script for this episode. I also realized that rather than doing one exhaustive and exhausting deep dive into a particular topic or archive, I want to do a whole series on the topic of X-Files fanfiction. It doesn't mean that we will only be talking about fanfic on this podcast. It just means that we will have more opportunities to talk about some of the most fascinating bits of fanfic lore. Enthusiasm for fic springs eternal, but so does the source material. I have to say I am very excited about this series. We're going to do deep dives into the likes of alt.tv.xfiles Creative and Ephemeral and Gossamer. We're going to explore those now almost forgotten archives dedicated to the more obscure ships. Where are my Scully Krychek fans at? We're going to talk about slash fic and alternate universe series. The world of X-Files fanfiction is vast, and its history is as fascinating as it is bizarre. I mean, where else would you read a story about marine biologist Mulder getting it on with Merman Krychek? And on that note, I say goodbye, for now. And I would like to wrap this episode up with yet another comment on Nascent's 1998 post made by user Dasha. I so agree with you, Nascent. If I was just coming into the fanfic scene and I read all those posts here on ATXC, I'd be terrified to post my first story. The thing is, we have to allow people to make their own mistakes. Am I ashamed of my first fanfic? Of course. But guess what? I have learned from the mistakes I made in my first stories and from feedback from my readers, and I'd like to think that I have improved since then. My best advice to a newbie author is simply read as much quality fanfic you can get your hands on, watch the show, learn the characters, use correct grammar and spelling, have a beta look it over. Besides that, write whatever is your heart's desire. It's your story. Go ahead and tell it.